You want to hear from an old paratrooper? Well, we're going to. And we're also going to find out if bullets spin to the right or spin to the left. And when they do, does it make a difference in their deflection? Boy, it sure does. More coming up on Ron Spomer Outdoors Podcast. Got a little sleepy there. Sorry about that, guys. Hey, you want to hear from our paratrooper first or the spinning bullets first? Let's go with the spinning bullets. Tyrell, a bullet is usually spinning in one direction, either counterclockwise or clockwise, typically known as right or left. I don't know if all manufacturers use the same or not, but if that bullet is spinning left and the crosswind is on the right blowing left, is there more drift than in the directions if they're opposite to each other? Good question, Tyrell. There are two things at work here. One is wind deflection and the other is spin drift. So the spin drift it's got something to do with the Magnus force or the Magnus effect and precession and yaw and all kinds of complicated things that get a little bit confusing. But the thing for recreational shooters to understand is that you do get your bullet moving off of your line of departure, your line of sight, to one side or another, just based on the bullet spinning because of the rifling. You've got a rifling twist that spins your barrel, spins your bullet 150,000 to 250,000, sometimes even 300,000 revolutions per minute. And that spinning changes air pressure around that bullet, whether on the top or the bottom. And then you get a vortex behind the bullet that gives different pressures, and all of that stuff works with the Magnus effect, which is a complicated thing that physicists understand that can cause lift in a bullet. And oh man, then the yaw is the tip of your bullet circling around, not perfectly. The base of your bullet might be perfectly in line with the bore, but the nose is spinning like this until it settles down to a tinier spin. That's yaw, and that changes the wind drag on the bullet to a degree. A lot of things like that are going on, but the main thing is that bullet spins and drifts in the direction of the spin. So if you have a right twist barrel, which the vast majority of them are, your bullet is naturally going to drift to the right. And I think the U.S. military in World War I with the 30-06 cartridge and the bullet they were shooting at the time, I think it was 150 grain flat base, they figured it out that 1,000 yards, you were getting something like 5 to 6 inches of spin drift. That's how much that bullet would move off the line. Now you add wind into and it's different. The wind is affecting the bullet's drift in the direction the wind is blowing. So if you have a right twist, you're already moving that 5 inches or so at 1,000 yards. Here comes the wind at 10 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour. That encourages the bullet to move as well. And it's not just the wind blowing the bullet. It's the wind's effect on the bullet weather vaning into the wind and then spin drift and it work together and off she goes. But if you get a wind from the other side, it's going to counter the deflection to the right. Just change things to the left. If you just happen to have a weird left twist barrel, everything would be different. But I think the important thing to know is that this stuff happens quite a ways down there. You really don't need to worry about it at typical 300-yard max shooting distances, probably even 400, because it accelerates downrange. It gets more and more. It's not a steady progression as you get farther down. And then the wind deflection, oh man, that is an absolute science. No, it's an art. There's some science and physics involved, but the art form comes in because the wind is never consistent across the flight of the bullet. At least it doesn't seem to be. There might be some trees in the way that stop the wind for a time, or the wind might slide up a little bit of a rise or down into a canyon, and it just changes. It simply be a gust where you are and no gust down by the target or halfway to the target. All sorts of variables come into play here. I once had the pleasure at FTW Ranch in Texas to watch smoke bombs down this draw we were shooting. So you had a kind of a main creek draw wending its way into the distance out to 1,000 yards, and then coming in from the side at various points were smaller drainage draws that were funneling wind different ways. So the guys would go out there and drop colored smoke bombs like in 4th of July stuff, purple ones, yellow ones, orange ones, and you'd watch the smoke rise and then get blown by wind. And across that distance, it was going in every direction. Some of it was going straight up. Some of it was blowing to the left. Some of it was going to the right. Some of it was actually going down a little bit with a downdraft. Holy mackerel. How do you see that stuff? You don't. And this is where the art comes in. The more you shoot, the more you start to study wind and landscape forms, orthographic lift and such, you learn that. But you can depend on the spin drift. That's pretty consistent from bullet to bullet in a certain cartridge, a certain velocity, and all the rest of it. You can figure that stuff out. But again, I just like to stalk closer. If you don't go shooting game at 1,000 yards or even 800 or 600, you don't have to worry about that stuff. And when I'm out hunting, I look at hunting as an escape to joy and reality. I don't want to do a lot of math, computations and stuff when I'm hunting. Steel plate, target shooting and stuff, great exercise. But golly, when I'm out there, I want to hear the birds sing and I want to see my game and I want to worry about which way the wind's blowing and can I stalk him? Can I find a place to get out of sight? Can I crawl quietly enough they don't crunch the leaves and alert the game? And I just want to be Daniel Boone. Call me Ronyo Boone. I'm out hunting. Yeah, if I have to take a 300-yard shot because the sun's about to go down and this is the last day of my hunt and I just spent $1,000 and I drove for 2 days to get there and all those other reasons we take those little bit risky shots, I want to be able to make that shot. But I am not going to train to make killing shots on game at 800 yards. I just don't want to do that. I tried one time just so I would know what I'm talking about and say, I've been there, done that. I took a 777-yard shot under perfect conditions. No wind that we could detect anywhere and wide open terrain. Where the deer was no cover for him to escape into. He had to go at least a quarter mile to get into any kind of brush and escape. We had 2 rangefinders so we could double check the distance. We had been practicing with that rifle and knew it was doing what it was supposed to do. We had the dial scope. Everything was absolutely perfect. I had 3 different ways to rest myself and the rifle. Rest in front of the rifle, rest of my elbow up against something, my back against something. I was rock solid. And I took several click shots on an empty chamber just to watch the reticle and see what happened when I shot. And it was staying on target the whole time. So under those conditions, I thought, in the interest of science, I'm going to take one. And I did. And we got the deer. The bullet went right where it was supposed to go, right in the shoulders. But I'm not doing that on a regular basis, guys. I'm back to stalking Ronnie. So that's my take on the wind deflection issues and the spin drift. I just shoot close enough that I don't have to worry about it. All right, Daniel, what have you got going on here? The Spanish-American War. Daniel says, just remember, during the Spanish-American War, the Spanish did not have Spitzer bullets. Oh, he's chewing me out for saying they did. I thought they had a 173 grain Spitzer bullet, but they were round nose, according to Daniel. They had round nose bullets and they were going 200 to 300 feet per second faster than the 30-40 Craig bullets that the U.S. troops were shooting. This was during the Spanish-American War, 1898, in Cuba and in the Philippines. But probably more importantly, the Spaniards had a stripper clips for their fast reloading. That is an important point, Daniel. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that's the reason they called them the killer bees. That was the nickname for these Mausers that were shooting us. They could reload so darn quickly with those things, not just shot by shot, but the whole magazine, just push in a stripper clip and you're ready to go again. With the 30-40 Craig, you had to open up that lunchbox door hanging off the side there and drop rounds in and then close it and get going again. So it was a little slower. All right. What else do you have to say here, Daniel? Meanwhile, our guys carried loose rounds that had to be loaded into an awkward magazine. Yeah. Under stress or even at the range, it's easy to drop rounds. Boy, that's for sure. Spain did not get Spitzer bullets until 1913, 6 years after we did. Oh, how do you like that? We beat them on that one. Ron, if you make this mistake, you'll be required to do a video explaining your misinformation. All right, Daniel, this is that video. Full credit to you and slap Ron for making a mistake. No, this isn't a desperate attempt by a less successful fan to feel relevant. No, Daniel, I don't accuse you of that. Always like to get our facts straight here, and you guys, I count on you to help me out on some of these. Seriously, watching a video on how the Krag loads versus a Mauser, you'll understand why the Spitzer bullet mistake is so misleading. Lots of love from Nevada, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. Let's see what Scott has to say. Ron makes fun of the belt on Weatherby cartridges, but doesn't explain that the belt is for headspace, not to fortify the case against excessive pressure. Well, you're absolutely right, Scott, except for accusing me of doing that. That's just the opposite. I've always said the belt on the Weatherby case is for head spacing, and it does not strengthen the case at all. That's just a misconception that people have had for a long, long time. So you kind of got it right, but you blame the wrong guy. What does Paul have to say? Paul says, hey, I'm showing my inexperience here, but what the heck does holdover method mean? That's a good one, Paul. Holdover is what us old fudge do to drop our bullet in at distance. This is what in the 20th century, before the advent of rangefinders and dialing scopes and all the rest, you just had either a front sight or a crosshair reticle in your scope. And if that animal was out there to where you thought, you know, if I hold dead on, my bullet's going to fall about 18 inches and drop underneath that animal. I better hold high. So you just held over. And we would literally know with a particular load, for instance, that if it's at 350 yards, I need to hold my horizontal reticle right on its back line over its shoulder. And then a bullet will drop about 14 inches or whatever it was right into the boiler room. And then if it's at 400 yards and you knew that your drop was 18 or 20 inches, you knew the deer was probably 18 inches from the brisket to the back line. As long as you held a few inches above that, your bullet was going to drop into that 18-inch vital zone somewhere in the deer's chest. There's your holdover. And it worked quite well. Most of the 20th century experienced long-range shooters did pretty well with that, including moi. I grew up learning to shoot that way, and I still shoot that way largely to this day because I try to keep my shots inside of a distance at which I can keep the crosshair on the animal or just slightly over it. If it's further away than that, I get closer. All right. Good question, Paul. Shane, what do you have to say? The big thing with hunters today is most people are so busy just trying to feed their family and making a living that they can't really enjoy the outdoors. That's my thing. So I'm so busy, well, it drives me nuts. I get to the woods and I think, boy, I have this to do and I have that to do. I got to get back and get to work. I don't have time to be sitting in the woods. Makes me feel useless that I'm not amounting to anything. It sucks because I love to deer hunt. I'd love to do an elk hunt and a mule deer hunt, but I just can't see that it'll ever happen. But anyway, I think that the thing that happened, that's happened to a lot of hunters who are just too busy. That's why they want it to be done and over with. That's why they have to get back to work. Lots of laughs, Shane. Yeah, Shane was responding to something I'd said a while back in one of my casts about some hunters out there bragging about, I got my deer at 2 minutes after legal shooting light so I could go home and watch football. And I said, if your objective was to watch football, why did you go deer hunting? You wasted an opportunity. But Shane is saying, I'm so busy, I've got to shoot quick and get home and get to work. Well, I am sorry about that, Shane. If that is absolutely true, I would urge you to try to figure out a better way to do it. Because if you're not getting out and hunting enough, you're just not enjoying life. No, I understand. My dad worked 6 days a week and dark to dark. I would hear him whistling in the dark going off to work. And coming back some nights at 10, 11 o'clock. Hard work. And Mom worked just as much. Those people worked. But that back in the 20th century, folks who grew up in the dirty 30s when we had it were horrible times and you just had to work. Everyone in my family was working all the time. And I can remember being chastised for being lazy when I was younger because I wanted to go fishing and hunting. I was chopping in the bean field. My uncle, Alvin, and his wife, Frida, planted beans, and the year before it was a cornfield, and the corn would sometimes volunteer and come up in the beans, and they wanted to chop it out of there. So they would get a corn knife, a machete, and walk down the rows, and where you saw corn coming up, you'd whack it out of there so it wouldn't get in the way of harvesting the beans later. And that thing was within a half mile of my favorite little fishing creek, which was full of championship brown bullheads. It's a form of catfish, pretty small one. I think like the state record's probably 4 pounds. We usually caught a half pounders to pounders, but they were in this creek and I was so nuts to go fishing that I took my machete and I ran down those rows as fast as I could got to the end and got the fishing rod that I'd stashed into the back of the pickup and ran over to the creek. They had to come over there and drag me out and put me back to work. That's how crazy I was to fish. So Shane, you might want to try something like that, to sneak to the end of the row and run off with your rifle and do a quick deer hunt. Oh yeah. Sorry about that. How about Dan? Hey, Ron and everybody else, please note that bear spray expires after a few years. Ooh, I didn't know that, Dan. I'm not sure how many years it takes, but if you are concerned enough to take it, you better make sure that it isn't expired. Maybe that's why some of these bear spray stories are saying that it doesn't work. Maybe they're using old bear spray. Wow, I hadn't thought about that. Now, Dan says, I don't know exactly what happens. Does the aerosol leak out, or does the capsaicin lose its potency? Good questions, Dan. You guys might want to look into that. I'm going to try to remember to do some research on that. But apparently this bear spray with the pepper spray inside of it, really strong, powerful stuff, probably doesn't work, maybe 5 years after you bought it or something. So yeah, that is definitely worth checking out. You don't want to grab an old one and then Mr. Grizzly charges you and you hit him with some spray that's nothing more than a little water bath or something. Whew. Good one, Dan. Thanks for sending that in. Oh, here's our paratrooper. I saw these headlines. Old school paratrooper. Mr. Spomer, I just wanted to add a little information to your bear spray discussion. I worked in private sector security for years after I left the military. I became a pepper spray and OC spray instructor while working at a company. A few details that are important to keep in mind. Bear spray is often a higher concentration, higher capsaicin than the stuff that we use on people. Yeah, I thought that was the case. And bears have far more tissues and sensitivity to the chemicals than humans do. Yeah, big long nose, a lot more tissue in there. All right. The best nose in the woods tends to belong to the bears. Initially, this would make many think that bears should be more affected by the sprays than humans. But we regularly see humans fight through being sprayed. It's miserable, but it's doable. Part of our training did include fight drills after being sprayed. Why? Because when you deploy pepper spray, there's a high likelihood that you're going to get some sprayed back into you, especially in the close quarter situation. As part of the team, you're likely to get overspray from one of your team members deploying the spray. So if humans can fight through this spray, it only makes sense that a hungry bear or a sow protecting her cubs will be minimally deterred, if at all, by spray. Like you said, these animals are fast and powerful. Living in the wild makes a tough critter that is used to discomfort. I wouldn't trust my life to pepper spray dealing with people after my experiences, so there's no way I'd be trusting my life to it in the woods. I like the other point that you brought up. Odds are, if it's a close encounter, you're only going to get time to pull one thing out. If the bear is in range of the spray, you're in range for being mauled, so don't gamble with your life. Don't kill animals you don't need to kill, but don't get killed by an animal either if you don't have to. Thank you, sir, for your time and all your research, and thank you for putting it into the videos and articles. Well, thank you, old school paratrooper. Sounds like you're probably not going to trust bear spray to handle the situation. I don't either, but there are plenty of people who do, and they swear by it, or they swear at me for not swearing by it. Let's see what Mike has to say with bear rifles. Mike says, regarding bear rifles, well, he doesn't say much, but I like it. Great video. I think it's important to also talk about sights and scopes for bear defense and hunting. Oh, that is a good point. Mike, I never thought of that. Why not? I don't know, but I'm glad you did. Yeah, so we talked about a rifle for hunting bear, but also one for bear protection, and handguns for bear protection. I would say on handgun for bear protection, your best sight is what's on the gun, open sights. This is going to happen so close. You need to train to pick up that front sight and get it on that bear. Front sight, front sight, front sight. You want that front sight to be there and get him. If you start putting any kind of a sight on top of it, red dots, holographic, you're just going to slow things down. You can have issues with your holster and maybe it'll break. Who knows what? No. Defensive handgun, it's all about speed and accessibility. But as for the rifle, again, if it were just for defense, like a Marlin guide gun 4570, 18-inch barrel thing, nice and compact, you're going to be right there and you're going to want that open sight. You don't want a scope on it. You don't want a red dot or anything else. Now, red dots can work. I'm going to a little bit of a caveat here. A lot of the PHs in Africa are starting to think about sticking them on their rifles for protection against lions and Cape buffalo and that sort of thing. So it might be that those are working out. They're certainly handy for getting that light on the animal really quickly. Just anywhere in that little viewfinder, you see the red dot and you put it on there, you're pretty much there. And for some folks, that's easier than finding that front sight. Regardless, though, you do have to train a lot. I mean, it's one thing to bring up your gun and take a little bit of time to find that front sight and line it up in the rear notch. If you're in a charge situation, you've got to be able to just throw that thing. It's sort of like a shotgun. It needs to fit you and be right there. This is where stock fit on a rifle is important. With a scoped rifle, it's not all that critical that you have your stock fitting you just perfectly. With a shotgun, it is, because the shotgun needs to point where you're looking. The same with a defense open-sighted rifle, I would think. So that's what I would recommend. Now, for a hunting rifle for bears, of course, you're probably going to want a scope. You want to make a precise shot. That is your best protection against any sort of hazards with a bear coming after you've antagonized it by shooting it and not hitting it in the right place. So I would definitely have a scope. And there are so many different options on scopes, but I would keep it fairly light. Most hunting scopes I have found work a lot better if they're small and light than big and bulky and complicated. You just want to have, even a fixed 4X. It's just nothing to worry about, fewer things to break, no dials to turn or get accidentally turned and all the rest of it. So keep things simple. I would go with a variable, but that would be something like a 2.5 to 8 or a 3 to 9, maybe as big as a 3 or 4 to 12 range. But golly, a big bear in most bear places, you're going to be plenty close enough for that kind of power. Plus, most guides do not want you shooting bears at long ranges. They want to be in close. You want to maximize the energy in a bullet when it gets there, and close always helps. And also, make a clean shot. Close always helps for clean shots. All right, let's see what the team is surprising us with today. Ooh, all kinds of things. Something from Tennessee? Yes, Tennessee, Greg. I have an awesome Winchester Model 70 chambered in a 7mm Remington Magnum. I bought it used. I love the cartridge. I have taken several deer with this rifle, but I found that when I zero it, I have to shoot one round, let it cool for several minutes, then shoot another in order to get even moderately consistent groups. Help! I can't shoot 3 to 5 rounds without the groups expanding beyond the vitals of a whitetail deer at 100 yards. That is really bad. I would love your input on my issue. I'll pay whatever it takes. All right. I'm going to have to come up with a bill for you here. Diagnose the issue for me. I trust your judgment. Boy, okay. Keep up the good work. Okay. Let's see if I can help you here, Greg. You've got a serious problem if your grouping is that bad. Now, it is not unusual for rifles to put their cold barrel shot slightly apart from the group when it's warm. But you're having a bigger problem than that. I mean, if you're serious about it expanding beyond a white-tailed deer, you're looking at a good 10 inches. So, there's a problem with your bedding, or your scope could be loose. It should not be that rough at 100 yards. So you need to, first of all, determine exactly what's causing this inaccuracy. I wouldn't think it's the ammunition. My first check would be the scope. A lot of times our scopes have weakened and or broken, or they're loose. So check your mounts, make sure everything is tight, and then dial your scope and see if it will move. If you can put a grid up as a target at 100 yards with 1-inch square grids or even 2-inch square grids, big enough so that you can see them, then dial your scope. If you got a quarter MOA adjusting scope, if you click it 4 times, it should move an inch. So you should see the crosshair move an inch. If it is not moving, then you've got a problem inside that scope. And that's probably the spring Sometimes there are 2 springs and sometimes there are 4, but the springs get weak and or break. You're making adjustments in your scope and it's not going where it's supposed to go. And if you shoot and the recoil jars things, suddenly now your crosshair is pointing somewhere else. And then you shoot and it's pointing somewhere else. So you've got to make sure your scope is working properly. Once you've done that, check your barrel and your bedding. The barrel is touching one side of the rifle stock, but not the other. That could push your shots. If it's erratic and loose and hits one side, then one shot, the other side and the other shot, yeah, that could throw things around. What else could you look for? The actual bedding of your rifle in the stock needs to be hard. So just those 2 screws that are underneath the belly of the rifle, how tight are they? Tighten the front one, the one that's in front of the trigger guard, in front of the magazine. Tighten that one down to a good 25 to 40 inch-pounds. Good and tight, just really tight. And that should fix it in the stock so that it's not slopping and sliding around. The tang one at the back of the trigger bow that goes up into the tang of the rifle, that one doesn't have to be that tight. Sometimes if you tighten those down, you're flexing the action. If it's not flat in the stock completely, it's going to bend it a little bit, and that can cause some inaccuracy. I've never known it to do what you're describing, but that might be part of it too. So check that out. Another thing might be the crown of the muzzle. The end of the muzzle is damaged or dinged. Instead of having a perfectly smooth circle of all the rifling being exactly at the same distance away, and when that bullet comes out, the gases jet around it. And if one part is dinged or damaged, it gets a different pressure of gas, and that pushes your bullet off. That could be an issue. What else could make for inaccuracy? Tight stock, good bedding, sights. That's where I would start. If that doesn't fix it for you, you need to get back to me and we'll work on it some more. But without the rifle and seeing exactly what's going on, I'm trusting you, of course, that you're not doing this. It is possible. There are some guys who go, close their eyes and yank the trigger and wonder why they don't get good groups. I'm not accusing you of this, but I've seen it before. So I often recommend that you let somebody else shoot your rifle for you, a good shooter, somebody you trust, and see if there's a difference there. I had a friend one time who was complaining about the lousy grouping he was getting from his rifle. I said, you mind if I take a few shots? And I took 3 shots and dropped him in under a minute of angle, and he was flinching and shooting them all over the place. So that is a possibility, but I don't think that's what it is in your case. Hey, thanks for writing in on that. I hope I helped you out. Let me know what happens on that one. If that isn't it, because it could be something really serious, like your barrel's really in bad shape. Your barrel isn't shaped like a banana, is it? No. This is Ryan, looks like from Alabama. Mr. Spomer, first and foremost, I love your channel. All right. I like you already, Ryan. There's something refreshing about sitting down to your show and feeling like I've sat down at the patriarchal table of discussion at our family long ago. Often after a family get-together or holiday meal, there were lengthy, in-depth debates over everything from ballistics to scripture. You not too long ago did a deep dive on the Battle of the 7mm. I appreciated your due diligence, but just at present opinion, I see plenty of value and life left in the old Rem Mag to justify jumping to the PRC for minimal benefits. Oh, he doesn't see. Oh, I see plenty of value and life left in the 7 Mag to justify. The Titan clash I would really love to see you break down would be between a 300 Win and 300 Ackley and a 300 PRC. I'm curious, so see how closely the Ackley bridges the gap between the two. Also, there's a ton of confusion and debate on the real 300 AI. Is it the 300 Ackley Magnum, the 300 Improved Ackley Magnum, the 300 Win? I'm looking forward to seeing your findings. Oh my gosh, Ryan, I'm going to have to do a whole video on that. I can't just do that one off the top of my head. Now, I think get what you're saying here. I got confused about the 7mm, but you're saying that based on what I presented on the 7mm Remington Magnum, and the PRC, that there's probably not a real good justification for jumping from the 7 that you already own to the PRC. And that sort of was my conclusion. They're doing almost the same velocity. Now, there's some issues right now with the PRC not getting its advertised velocities, which is because they can't get the preferred powder that does that. The powder shortages have kind of caused a glitch right there. But the volume of the case and what it's capable of doing is still just as good as a 7 Rem Mag. You've just got to get the right powder matched up to it. But as you said, there's just not that much different to make it worth jumping unless you want to do some precision long-range shooting with the really long high BC bullets. You can hand load those in the 7 Rem Mag, but you just don't go down and buy things like the wield of the PRC. Then with the 300s you're talking about, there are going to be similar issues with the newer ones versus the old one. And the 300 improved Ackley's and stuff, gosh, there are so many of them. I'm working on a 30 caliber book right now. And my gosh, you name a 30 that hasn't been turned into some wildcat. You probably can't find it. They've just made every case you can think of into a 30 except for the 22 rimfire. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Maybe I'll work on that here later, but I appreciate your offer for a new topic there, Ryan. We'll see if we can get to it someday. All right, we're going to go to Florida. Todd. Ron, thanks for your decades of informative and entertaining reading. Oh, Todd's a little bit older then. He's going back to my days as a scribe for the hunting magazines, and that goes clear back into the 1970s. I know I don't look that old, but it's true. Now, what else does Todd have to say? I am shooting a 270 Winchester, 130 grain bullet, muzzle velocity of 3,000 feet per second. Sounds about right. I would like to sight in this rifle so that it hits 2 inches high at 100 yards. It may be that the only shooting range available to me has a distance of 25 yards. If I want that bullet to be 2 inches high at 100 yards, what should be the point of impact at 25 yards? I welcome any thoughts you might have. Well, Todd, I'll give you my idea, but I would urge you to go to an online calculator and calculate it precisely for yourself. It'll make a little bit of difference on what bullet you're using and its BC and all. But basically, from 25 to 100, you need to be a little bit low at 25 yards. Figure about, I'd say about a quarter of an inch low, maybe a little more than that. Now, you have to be really precise at 25 yards. You know, you can't be like, oh, it's a half inch low, close enough. It's going to make a big difference at 100. So if you can, I would make my aiming dot so tiny you can barely see it, almost covered up with your crosshair, and try to get a quarter of an inch below that. If you use a 1 inch circle and you aim for the center and you're quarter inch below that, you're more like a half inch. So you need to really be precise on this one, but try to get that bullet to strike a quarter of an inch to a third of an inch at 25 yards. That should get you 2 inches high or so at 100 yards. Certainly good enough if you were going deer hunting in an area where you weren't going to be shooting more than about 250 yards. That should be good enough for a dead on hold. But boy, if you can, try to get to a longer range to double check that stuff. But I understand a lot of you guys, you just don't have access to a range with some distance to it. And that's tough. But you're thinking, at least you're getting to understand ballistics are going to make a difference, because they surely do. All right, Bill Holmes from Massachusetts. Ron, I thought about a firearms question, and you're the guy to ask. Might not be the guy to answer, but I'm the guy to ask. When people talk about a pre-64 Winchester, I always thought that applied to Model 94s and Model 70s. I saw an advertisement somewhere where some more utilitarian firearm was advertised as pre-64. I forget exactly what it was, but I didn't think a pre-64 single shot something or other would matter. What does pre-64 really apply to, Bill? Well, Bill, I don't know what this rifle, this single shot rifle you were referring to was, but I'm with you. The pre-64 referenced the Model 70 most particularly, and a little bit of the Model 94 lever action, because what they did in 64 was they were trying to save money and manufacturing steps. The Model 70 was getting a little bit too expensive to compete successfully against the Savages at the time, and especially the Remington 700. That was the big competitor. And that Remington 700 was just easier to build with fewer manufacturing steps. So they were thinking, how can we make it a little easier with these Winchesters? So the big mistake they made was to stop building the controlled round feed action, which is what made the Model 70 Winchester the rifleman's rifle. It was essentially a Mauser copy, refined, and that's why we loved it so much. They took away the controlled round feed. What that was this spring that you'll see on the side of the bolt of a Model 70 or a Mauser 98. It's a big long bar that's on the side of that round bolt body. That bar is the actual extractor, the big hook that reaches up front and grabs the rim of your cartridge to pull it out. Really strong. And that's what guys wanted. When the stuff hit the fan and the lion was about to jump on you, you needed to get your old case out and a new round in. This would do the job without slipping off or breaking and that sort of stuff. So it got quite a reputation and everybody loved it. Well, they took it off to save these manufacturing steps, and they went to a push feed action, the same as a Remington, and plenty of people were loving that Remington 700, but it didn't have this reputation of being a controlled round feed. So people went, I don't like this new model Winchester with a push feed. If I wanted a push feed, I'd get a Remington. So, Winchester took it into shorts with that thing. And the other things they did were they changed the stock so it wasn't the same classic lines, and they went with impressed checkering instead of real checkering and a few things like that. They just got cheaper. They cheapened the product and drove people nuts. I don't remember on the 94 exactly what they did there to kind of cheapen it either, but whatever they could do to make it a little easier to build and less expensive to build, they did. So mostly, though, it's the Model 70. I have never heard of a single shot. I don't know if Winchester was making a single shot in those days. The most famous I can think of is the Model 85 single shot rifle. And that's pretty basic and pretty simple. I don't know what they would have done to that to change it. So I think you're right. They were just, people are getting confused about this pre-64 stuff. What about Ken? Ken here from Kentucky. Kentucky Ken. He's got a Browning BAR in 30-06. That's the Browning automatic rifle in a 30-06. That has been around a long time, and it's a pretty darn good little rifle. Well, Ken says, I recently saw a video, and you, that's meaning me, you stated that you didn't care for low rings for scopes. However, when looking on Browning's site, they recommend low rings. For example, 3 to 9x40 scope. Is that correct? What is the best way to choose your ring height? I have a 3 to 9x40 Leupold I plan on using. I also purchased a Browning BLR, that's the lever action rifle. If I go low rings with that same scope, will it clear the hammer? Thanks so much for your time. I plan on using steel 2-piece mounts and rings for the BAR and an alloy integrated 1-piece for the BLR in 270. Okay, let's cut to the chase here. You want to choose your rings based on whether it will hold your scope off the rifle. If you've got a big bell on the front of the objective of your scope and you have a low ring, that bell's going to hit the barrel and you won't get it to fit in the rings. Then you need to go to a medium ring or even a high ring. I hate high rings. I don't know where you got the idea that I didn't like low rings, because I want my rings as low as I can get them. I want to just see a little bit of air between the front bell and the barrel. You don't want them touching. But you brought up another good point, which is the eyepiece back there. That can get so big that it gets in the way, especially of a hammer gun like you mentioned. So you do need to look out for that. One option is to put a spur off of the hammer. Most of those hammer guns these days will have a little screwed in spur thing that sticks out so you can easily access it. But your other option would be to get your scope higher. The problem with a high scope, higher than you really need it to be, is that you're pulling your head off of the stock, off of the comb. And you raise it up like that, you don't get that nice firm cheek weld, which helps keep things steady. It's not the worst thing in the world. I've shot plenty of rifles in which I had to move up quite a bit on them, but as long as you've got a good solid rest elsewhere and all, for general shooting, it's okay. Not for precision work, though. But that's why you want to mess around with different ring heights. Got to fit the scope to the rifle. Keep them as low as you can, though, is my motto. Okay. Good one, Ken. How about Chris from Arizona? Aren't 30 caliber cartridges for North American big game nearly obsolete? Won't the more potent 7mm kill elk, moose, bison, grizzly, and muskox? Well, I don't know, Chris, where you got the idea that 30 calibers are obsolete, because they're still extremely popular and probably always will be. That's the all-American caliber. 30-30, 30-06, 30-40 Krag. We started the 30s. There were hardly any other 30s around the world. So they're going to hang in there for a long, long time. But it is true that the 7mm will handle almost everything. And I think, as folks who have seen my book know, that I'm kind of a fan of the 7mm. I've often said that I think the 7mm is the right diameter of a bullet, 0.284 of an inch, to enable you to get some good long bullets for high BCs and good, effective, efficient downrange travel, and still carry enough energy to do the job when you get there, still wide enough to make a big hole and all that good stuff that people like, without being unnecessarily big and heavy, so you don't suffer a lot of recoil. It's just a great balance. You know, it's not too big for the lighter animals like pronghorn, but it's not so small that it's not going to work on moose. And you can ask the moose that I've put in the freezer over the years that I've taken with 7s. They work. And of course, we always go to Africa and Karamojo Bell and his elephant hunting with a 7x57 Mauser. I used the 275 from Rigby, but it's the same cartridge. And he was taking buffalo and eland and kudu. And you got to remember those guys back in the old times when they were exploring Africa and all, and were essentially market hunting legally in those times. They had to feed their crews, because they are out in the wilderness, literally no roads or anything. And they would just head off into the unknown country with local folks who could guide them as best they could, but they would even get pretty far out of their bailiwicks. Those people didn't just roam all over Africa. Each little tribe had its area, and you didn't go into someone else's without getting in trouble. But if you had a big crew of guys and you were doing a safari, and kind of this is where the word safari came from, it's a going trekking into the wilds, you had to carry enough supplies along with you, and they really couldn't. So they had to shoot meat. And he was tasked with providing food for all of the carriers, the folks who carried his tusks out, and the camp gear and tents and all this stuff. It was quite an expedition. But he was successful just using a 7mm on all those big African animals. So yeah, those things work. By the way, if you guys want to understand why I love the 7 so much, my book will tell you. I've covered all the 7mm I could find. There's something like 63 or some in here, maybe 67. Can't remember exactly. A lot of them are Wildcats. Some are proprietary cartridges, and some of them are obsolete, but I cover the history of them from the very first one that anyone ever made right up until the most recent, and describe who made them, when and why and where, and exactly what they do, and how they stack up against one another in their power levels and the bullets they can shoot and all that stuff. It's kind of fun. So if you like 7s, you might want to check that out. You can buy it from Amazon. Or if you want to spend more money, I'll send you an autographed copy. You can go to ronspomeroutdoors.com, our website, and go to the store, and there the book will pop up. I think you'll also find my Predator book on there. Happy to sign those for you guys. Okay, let's see. Jeff. This is another 7mm guy, Jeff. He's from British Columbia. Recoil. Let's see what he has to say here. I enjoy your videos. My question is this. I currently have a 7 Mag. I love it. But due to the recoil, I use a brake. Ouch. I hope you use some ear protection. When hunting, I need to wear serious ear protection. Here we go. Because it's shockingly loud. Yes, that's where I was going. And a suppressor is not an option in Canada. It's not a real good option down here either. You have to jump through some hoops, but at least we can get them. If I've got a second rifle for deer, perhaps elk, in say a 708 or a 6.5 Creedmoor or a 6.5 PRC, that would have less kick, therefore no brake. Would you recommend a Wilson Combat Nula? That's a rifle, new ultralight arms. Or a Sako 90 Peak? I don't know that one. Or a custom build on a Tikka action. Whew. The Nula and the Peak are similar in price. However, the Sako appears to have a few more features. That said, I'm not able to shoot either before buying. She's got to buy a pig in a poke here, I guess. My worry with the Tika build is that the potential for the cost to get out of hand while not getting much more for the money. Your thoughts would be appreciated. Jeff, as I said, I don't have any experience with the Sako 90. I'm getting one in for 30-06 week, and I'll be able to test it here within about a week. But right now, I'm just not that familiar with it. Nor the Tika. And a lot of guys love that Tika T3i, I think it is. And I haven't a lot of experience with that either. The Nula I have extensive experience with. But mine was the original version, the Ultralight Arms Model 20 in a 284 Winchester, with which I hunted mountains around North America. That rifle, and we were like this. We were buddies because whenever I pointed it at something, that something fell over. It was amazing. It was just like it was a guided missile I was shooting. And I'm talking doll sheep running flat out at 350 yards. I'm talking about 411-yard shots on couge deer across canyons. I'm talking about running coyotes and running deer, and it was crazy. And I can't even explain it. It was just like when I picked that thing up and aimed it, I just got this feeling that came across me that if you pull the trigger now, you're going to get that animal. And it always happened. I loved it. So I'm high on the Nula. I mean, I can't say enough about that rifle. What an outstanding build. Beautiful lightweight rifle, worked all the time. So that's my comment on that. The other ones, you're going to have to ask someone else about those. I know they're going to be heavier, and I like light. And as accurate as that rifle was, why worry about it's too light? It's just not. And I shot that thing offhand as well as sitting, as well as on sticks and off of backpacks and you name it. And I just couldn't see an excuse not to have a 6-pound rifle. And that thing weighs less than 5. But by the time you scope it, put a sling on it, and load it up in the magazine, you're up at about 6, just under. So that's what I would recommend. But you pick your own and suffer the consequences. Well, Jeff, I didn't see this coming, but this is the perfect segue to our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Shell Shock Hearing Protection. How do you like that? You know, these are the classic, well, I'm not going to fit them over this hat, but these are the classic range muffs with the sound deadening. And you also get to hear, of course. So you've got a mic in there and you can hear folks talk on the range and things. Or if you're hunting, you can hear crunch, crunch, crunch and all the sounds of the wilds. But when the shot goes off, it shuts things off with the little electronic device in there, a little computer. Fast enough to knock the blast off. So you do not get the loud blast. This takes off about 28 to maybe 30 decibels of sound, which is a big deal because decibels aren't on a linear scale. You increase a decibel 3 points, and I think it's something like 5 times more sound blast that you're hearing. It's a lot. So 30 is nice to shut down if you can get it, and these Shell Shocks are doing a great job for us. But I just love that I can turn this mic on and hear things. Now, I don't like to walk around the mountains with them on, but boy, for protecting your hearing at the range, or perhaps in a blind when you've got time to say, here comes my deer, I'm going to put my hearing protection on. Great way to do it. You might want to check them out. Shell Shock. All right, Mike. Mike is from Ohio, and he's got an older rifle that most of us probably haven't seen. It's a Remington 742 in 30-06. This is my first high-powered rifle. I plan to bow hunt in Ohio. Don't use the rifle. But this rifle is for New York in the Catskills, where bear and deer are automatically tagged on both the resident and non-resident hunting licenses. So my main question is about sighting distance. Have you ever considered sighting in at a shorter distance, like, oh, we're doing that 25-yard thing again? 25 yards for elevation, then verifying windage out at a farther distance to maintain a flatter trajectory with certain cartridges. When I was learning to shoot AR-15s in 5.56, I learned how to test how their trajectory is when sighting in at a shorter distance, like 25 yards. This prompted me to find an outdoor range where I could sight in at a longer distance and get a nice flat trajectory. I'm not quite following this. This also helped me practice a lot of my fundamentals in rifle shooting. But when I looked at the calculations made for the 30-06, it seems that if I sighted in at 25, my trajectory can still remain on average only 2 or 3 inches high out to 150 yards, and then only 5 inches low at about 300 yards, which I think even a novice shooter would be able to compensate for. Am I using a bum calculator, my brain, or is this something I should consider? Or should I stick to the tried and true sighted in at 100 yards and be done with it? Let me know what you think. Okay, I get where you're going here, Mike. You're talking about maximum point blank range. When he says flatter trajectory, longer distances, you're talking about being able to hold dead on your target and hit it farther out. How do you zero for that? You're on the right track here. Great. No, I don't know if your brain is off or not. I don't think so. But let's see if we can figure this one out. I think you're just about on it. If you sight about, as we said earlier in the show, 1/4 of an inch low at 25 yards, you should be about 2 inches high or so at 100 yards. And then you're going to be, as you noted, 150 yards, even higher than that, probably 3 inches high. And then your bullet's probably going to start dropping. And then you're going to be on at about 240, 250 yards. And you're going to be about 6 inches low at 300 yards. But this depends on what bullet you are shooting in that 30-06. You've got to know the weight of the bullet, the ballistics coefficient of the bullet, your actual muzzle velocity. A lot of this stuff varies. I don't know what your 742 is going to be cranking out for velocity. But here's the way you can test it. Zero that thing 2.5 inches high at 100 yards if you can. And then see where it hits at 250 and 300. That's the only way you can really verify it. Even if you know your bullet's BC and your muzzle velocity, your rifle is going to change the effective BC of that bullet a little bit, most likely, based on how well it stabilizes the yaw when it starts out and all these other things. So it's always worth checking. But as a general rule, if you can get a ballistics calculator and know your BC number and your muzzle velocity, you should be able to get a pretty accurate chart of what your drops are going to be when you zero it at different distances. But boy, for a 30-06, I have found that with most 150 to 165 grain bullets, if I zero that thing at about 250 yards, I'm pretty much good to hit the vitals of a deer out to about 300. So I hope that helps you out here. I think you're on the right track, Michael. Good luck with that. And that looks like, the end of the game. Hey, I want to thank all of you guys for bringing these points to my attention and asking me some really great questions. I had fun on this one. So thanks to Pete and Bill and Ken and Chris and Jeff and Michael and all the rest of you guys. This is working out pretty well. Hey, if you're enjoying these shows, let me know and we will continue to do them. We've been playing around with different formats, thinking maybe we'll just devote an entire show to questions about a specific topic, like the 30-06 or long range shooting or wind deflection. But I don't know, that sounds like it might be a little bit overkill or boring or something. So what do you think? We did one a while back on 7mm. All the questions were about 7mm. But maybe you want to listen to a show that week and you don't like 7mm and you wouldn't watch and want to listen to it. So write in and let us know what you think we should do with this stuff. The whole idea here is to educate and entertain at the same time if we can. So we're here to please you. Let us know what you would like to see. And it's time for our comment of the week. And this one is going to be going out to Shane. Shane was commenting on he'd love to get out and hunt more, but he just doesn't have time. He's got to get home and work, and he's stressed all the time. If he goes hunting, he thinks, why aren't I home getting my work done? That's no way to enjoy a hunt. Man, we can commiserate, Shane. I put a lot of time in like that myself. Gosh, I can remember when I used to be up on the roof laying shingles, and all I could think about was getting out into the woods to deer hunt, and I knew I couldn't do it because I had to work. This is life. But I urge all of you to carefully consider what you are allowing your life to run you, or are you running your life? You know, we all have to toe the line here and get the work done and support our families and one another and everything else. But I think too often we Americans value work for its own sake, workaholics. And we've got to learn to step back and say, do I need to work this hard to make this much money to buy all these things that I may or may not need. Now, it might be that you're just getting by and you're lucky to get enough food on the table, and I can commiserate with you on that situation. But boy, if you find that you're spending a lot of time spinning your wheels and working for the sake of working, you might want to sort of renegotiate with yourself and see if there isn't some way that you could free up a little bit more quality time and get outdoors. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I am outside hunting or even just birding, photography, anything that has to do with nature, it improves my life markedly. I just feel better. I do better. I think I'm a better person because of it. And that's got a lot of value, more than probably a new truck, even though I need one of those too. So thank you, Shane, and I'm wishing you excellent luck in getting ahead of the curve there and finding more time to get outdoors by yourself and with your family. Make it worthwhile. As I always say, you only go around once. Go for the gusto. Say, if you're interested in a gift for someone who is everything, we're always advertising my friend Doug Adam, the sculptor's Freedom Bells. Doug loves to build these. He sells a lot of them at galleries around the country, and they're really pretty popular. I mean, he was a welder, industrial welder, and he discovered that the oxygen tanks and such, if he cut them off, made some really remarkably good sounding bells. And as he built more and more of them, more and more people wanted one. So he started adding in rocks and glass that his wife makes and pieces of gun barrels and old machine parts and things. And it just does a remarkable job, I think, of making some pretty cool sculptures. The artist's name is Doug Adams, and he makes the Freedom Bells. Let freedom ring. And you can find Freedom Bells on Ron Spomer Outdoors website, ronspomeroutdoors.com. Go to the store, go to the Freedom Bells, and make Doug happy. This is Ron Spomer, Unhonest and Shoot Straight.